think they've come to terms with the fact that they are going to have to play a game here where they go along with the negotiations, they take part in this kind of charade of trying to get a peace deal, and they don't try not to upset the apple cart, in order to keep that US aid that is vital for them flowing, and to buy time, I think, until the Europeans get their act together to kind of provide meaningful support to Ukraine.
Now, talks on ending the war in Ukraine are reportedly in full swing in Saudi Arabia, with representatives of the US and Russia sitting down today. Now, Russian negotiators say discussions are going on creatively, but drone and missile attacks on Ukrainian cities are still happening, despite promises to end the strikes on energy infrastructure. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the Kremlin needs to keep and be kept to its word.
If President Trump can put more pressure on Putin in terms of details and force him to stop striking the infrastructure and the sea, if this is the first step and there are no other steps, then he should share details about how we are going to do it. I am sure that Ukrainian and American sides will support any step that will lead to decreasing the number of strikes on both military and civilian infrastructure.
The words of President Zelensky. In a moment, we hope to talk to Maxim Tucker, who's reporting for The Times in Ukraine. First, let's go to Marc Bennetts, who's covering the talks happening in Saudi Arabia. Marc, any word at all about the progress, apart from this use of creatively as an adjective to describe how things have been going today, and that was from the Russian side?
Hello, yeah. I think everyone realizes there's not going to be there's going to be no agreement on a full-scale ceasefire today. The signals from Russia certainly indicate that. Maria Zakharova, who's the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, just said not to expect any breakthroughs. That talks are going on in a number of directions, but there's no reason to expect any kind of peace imminent. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, said yesterday that we should not be deluded. This is the start of a very long and difficult path. And he also repeated the Kremlin's demand that the root causes of the war need to be eliminated before there can be any peace. The root causes is, of course, Kremlin byword for President Zelensky's pro-Western government in Kiev. So, I think the notion that magically that peace is suddenly going to be upon us after talks in Saudi Arabia today is misguided. No one really thinks that there's going to be any kind of lasting solutions to the war in the near future.
Well, I think you speak for the vast majority of people listening, Marc, quite honestly. But that is that optimism is being drip-fed to us from the White House, isn't it? Why do they keep repeating the notion that actually some sort of ceasefire, even if it is a relatively brief one, is within the grasp of the people having these talks?
Well, I think the notion of a ceasefire and peace are very different depending on who you talk to. The White House more recently seems to agree with Russia that peace is only possible if Ukraine essentially surrenders territory to Moscow. President Zelensky has ruled out doing that. It's also kind of tempting to suggest that the US negotiators aren't as informed as the Russian negotiators on the very things they're discussing. Witkoff, US envoy, was unable to even name the 4 regions that he's discussing with Russia. He couldn't name a single one of them yesterday when he was talking to Tucker Carlson. Obviously I can't read the minds of the White House. Maybe they're just kind of drawing on President Trump's hopes for peace and the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes,
it's a mystery, basically.
Well, it certainly is. It's a mystery trapped within an enigma. But a lot of people in Britain, and certainly people who've been listening to Times Radio during the course of today, will have heard some clips from that quite extraordinary interview that Tucker Carlson did with Steve Witkoff. It wasn't simply that he couldn't name the regions, but that he kept repeating, parroting the Putin lines. Pretty much word perfect. This is terrifying, actually, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. There was an interview today, Zelensky, was published today, Zelensky with Time magazine, where he said that he thinks some people in the White House have just been influenced so much by Russian propaganda, essentially, that they believe it more than their own intelligence. For example, last week when President Putin said that Ukrainian forces were encircled in the Kursk region, Western Russia, And Reuters reported that even the CIA had told Trump that it wasn't true, but he continued to repeat Putin's claim. So it's kind of hard to even find words for it. I mean, it's certainly unprecedented, but beyond that, I don't know.
Well, we'll settle for unprecedented for the time being. Marc, thank you very much indeed. Let's get the reality on the ground in Ukraine and join Maxim Tucker. Maxim, good afternoon from us. When you hear, and I'm sure you have heard, clips from that conversation between Tucker Carlson and Steve Witkoff, I actually dread to think what the people of Ukraine make of it. Any word from you on that?
Yeah, obviously they're incredibly frustrated and disappointed, but I think they've come to terms with the fact that they are going to have to play a game here where they go along with the negotiations, they take part in this kind of charade of trying to get a peace deal, and they don't try not to upset the apple cart. In order to keep that US aid that is vital for them flowing and to buy time, I think, until the Europeans get their act together to kind of provide meaningful support to Ukraine and for Ukraine to find alternatives on the really crucial intelligence sharing, the satellite imagery that is keeping many Ukrainian cities afloat, because without those early warning notices of when there is a ballistics missile launch and without Patriot missiles, Ukrainian cities are incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah, to be clear then, there is absolutely no evidence on the ground at all of a ceasefire. There are still drone attacks, people are still dying, civilians, very young children.
There is no ceasefire. There was a 5-year-old girl and her father were killed just last night in attacks by Russians. There have been attacks specifically on railway infrastructure, energy for railways, which is supposed to be part of the agreement that Trump has talked about in the press. There has been a massive cyber attack on Ukraine's railway network, which has brought it down today. And that presumably would also be covered by a ceasefire, cyber attacks as well. Russia is still very much trying to paralyze Ukraine as a nation. The Ukrainians are still coming to terms with it, and they're kind of wondering what on earth the US is talking about.
Can I just mention your excellent article at the in the Times and at thetimes.com today, where you spent time with this largely female fighting unit, nicknamed the Witches of Bucha. I mean, I urge other people to read it, but when I read it, I was really struck by the real lives led by these women before they took up arms. One ran a restaurant, one was a vet, another was an economics professor, and they have been dragged into this war and are doing really difficult work, often at night, after they put their children to bed. Just expand a little bit on these women and what they were like when you met them.
Yeah, so a lot of these women are people who experienced firsthand, who witnessed the atrocities that Russia visited on Bucha. They saw the victims of rape. They know about people that have been tortured. They have friends that were executed. You know, they understand fully what it is for the Russians to come back and for the Russians to try and take over Kyiv again. They understand the dangers that these nightly Shahed drone and missile attacks pose to their children, and they want to do something about it. I mean, one of them said, you know, when she was escaping from Bucha, a Russian came over and held a rifle to the head of her 8-year-old son, and she just felt so powerless. And this is a way for them to find some kind of control, to put some kind of control back in their lives, and to protect their children. They don't want to go to bed just kind of cowering in bunkers, in basements, hiding from the drones. They're going to actually try and shoot them down. So these women, night after night, they say goodnight to their children, they read a bedtime story, and then they go out with heavy caliber machine guns and try to shoot down the Russian drones that are terrorizing their town.
Yes, I mean, it really does concentrate the mind when you think that not that long ago, one was an economics professor. She cannot have imagined that this is how she'd be spending her nights.
Absolutely not. And, you know, she's now a specialist with a tablet. She's tracking Russian drones as they enter airspace. She's trying to coordinate with other units who are also trying to shoot down so they don't overlap. They take responsibility for their sectors. So she's got quite a crucial job as kind of one of the intellectuals of the unit. They all have different roles. You know, the leader of that unit, Calypso, who actually founded it, she was a partisan in the early days of the war, fighting against the Russians in Bucha because her granddad had told her to teach how to shoot a rifle from the age of 6. And she, you know, when I spoke to her, she really struggled to talk about the atrocities that the Russians had inflicted on her town and the horrors that she'd seen there. And it shows the depth of feeling as well, how difficult it will be, even if Zelensky does agree to a bad ceasefire, how Ukrainians would struggle to accept it. I mean, she is intent on killing as many Russians as possible. That's her new goal. And she even goes on kind of personal missions to other units on the front lines and takes part in assaults on Russian trenches because she just wants to kill as many as she can.
Yes, I mean, it's it's her truth. I guess we're in no position to argue with it. Grim though it is. Fantastic article, Maxim. Thank you very much indeed. It is really telling that Calypso, that's her code name, her grandfather did teach her how to use a gun when she was 6 because he told her, I think one day you might need to know.